Sure. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Ableton Music Producer Podcast. This is your host, Dan Giffen. I'm super stoked for today's episode with Laura Escude. Laura was on the podcast earlier, but today she has brought her awesome team of playback engineers, a bunch of Ableton Live gurus who are working in the industry with major label artists doing live setup and tours and all kinds of cool stuff for major label artists like The Weeknd, Ariana Grande, Kanye West. We could go on and on. But before we dive into today's episode with her and her team, I want to give you a quick heads up. If you didn't know, I recently started doing coaching sessions, which means that for 1 hour, you and I can meet once a month, and I will help you with whatever you need help with, whether you're new to Ableton Live or whether you need help finishing a track or whether you want help setting up your live rig for a show and you don't know how to set up your tracks for your DJ set or whatever. I would be glad to help you. It's $99 a month. That gives you a face-to-face online meeting with me, and you have access to all of my Ableton Live courses and a ton of content by other Ableton certified trainers. So definitely worth it. It's a steal. I'm not biased. And yeah, I would love to help you on your projects. Just go to liveproducersonline.com. Also, quick plug, if you don't own Ableton Live, then shame on you. You should buy Ableton Live 10, Suite, or Standard, and you can save up to 40% on either one of those by going to liveproducersonline.com. At the top, click Purchase Ableton Live, grab that license, totally worth it to upgrade, and yeah, it's good stuff. So, without further ado, here is today's episode with Laura and her team called Electronic Creatives. Thanks, guys, for joining. I'm excited to see all your faces again. It's been a while. I was in your Electronic Creatives program called MasterTrack. I think it was last June. And we've got the whole Electronic Creatives team, or most of them here, live with us today, just hanging out, and the finest of Ableton Live engineers in the industry. So I'm blessed to know you guys, and I'm excited to talk today with you about the ins and outs of your experiences working with some high-level artists and some exciting new classes that you have coming up in LA. We have Laura Escude and we have AJ and Greg here from the electronics team, and kind of the core of Electronic Creatives. And yeah, Laura, welcome back to the podcast. You were on the podcast, I think it was episode 18, if I'm not wrong, which we recorded, I think it was a year ago today. Which is kind of funny. Way. Yeah, I know, right? I just saw that. I was at the gym this morning and I was like, when was that? And I went back and I was like, oh, wow, we would have recorded it probably either a year ago yesterday or today. Small world.
That's awesome. Well, kudos to you for actually keeping up with the podcast a year later. I mean, I know a lot of people that have podcasts and they like, we're going to do it every week. And then they do like 3 and then drop off. So
yeah, I think a couple podcast episodes I mentioned, I was like, I'm going to start releasing one every week. And then like a month and a half later, I released another one. It's a lot of work, but thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Honestly, it's been great to meet you and a lot of other people through the podcast as well. But yeah, talk to us a little bit about Electronic Creatives. We have AJ here. What's up, AJ?
Hey, man.
And Greg's on his way back to the party. He ended up stepping out. I don't know where he went.
He says he's in, but
okay. There he is.
The connection thing.
Welcome back, sir. We just gave you an introduction without you being here.
I was listening the whole time. I don't really know. I got booted out, I guess.
That's fine. Well, we were just talking about Electronic Creatives. Laura, do you want to give a little bit of background for the listeners who don't know anything about EC and kind of how that started and your history with using Ableton Live and all that stuff?
Yeah, so I worked at Ableton in 2007 to 2008, became the first certified trainer in 2008, and started getting these calls for playback engineering jobs. First call was with Cirque du Soleil in Las Vegas, moved there for 4 months. Started getting other calls after that. I really didn't know what playback was when I got that call, and I learned quite a bit. So yeah, shortly thereafter, I started touring with Kanye and toured with him for about 7 years. And after started to work with Kanye, I started getting more calls for me to be a playback engineer on other gigs. And I started turning down a lot of work. And then I realized, well, instead of turning down work, I could put people on these gigs, and I could train them and have them go out on tour. And so 2011, I trained my first playback engineer and put him out on the road with a little known band called The Weeknd.
Yeah.
At the time, the time it was a very small band.
Mm-hmm.
And just kept building and growing from there. And so the company, originally we were doing master classes, Ableton master classes in the Los Angeles area, and then I started expanding and doing different cities, and that was in like 2009, 2010. And then around 2011 is when it started to focus more on the touring industry. And started, building the company bit by bit. Had probably about 5 playback engineers, grew, 5 or 6 people that I had trained leading up to 2014, 2015, and trained a few more. People were in and out. And then in 2017, AJ joined us as an intern. I had met both AJ and Greg at Berkeley Valencia, where I was a guest speaker and artist. Yeah. And AJ applied for an internship. I read over his resume. I was like, "You're in." He came to LA. I had him shadow one of our engineers on Harry Styles. That was his first thing that he did. It was like a 2-week rehearsal, and he jumped in, and he didn't know anything about playback, but he learned very quickly, and hired him. And then he brought Greg in, and we've been building the company a lot, the 3 of us, and other people, adding a lot of other people, especially in the past year. So it's been fun. Yeah.
Happily ever after. That's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a great team. Like I said a second ago, I was blessed to come join the MasterTrack program that you guys have in LA, which is actually going to be coming up again. You'll be doing that again, and we'll talk more about that in a second. And you talked about how the team came together, but AJ and Greg, I'd also kind of like to get your take. Like, what does it really mean to be a playback engineer? AJ, I know that you recently had the chance to do playback and live setup for Ariana Grande.
Yep, definitely. That was taking up a big portion of my summer this past year. And then funny Laura should mention Harry Styles, because coming up on probably about 2.5 years after just some initial shadowing, I spent a lot of this past month in London doing promo shows with Harry, and some more coming up before we pass it on to some of the rest of the network, some of the rest of the EC team. As a big aspect of what we do is the creating an interchangeability between our team of producers, basically, so that when we have a gig and something else comes up, we can plug in anyone who's available, because we all are, trained up on the same methods of working, and from the technical to the creative, we kind of all speak the same language. So it works out in that way,
Yeah. And obviously this is the Ableton podcast. A big part of what you guys are doing is with Ableton Live. But I also know that a big part of what you guys do is building rigs that are custom to the artist's needs, which I think is a big part of creating the whole solution for pulling off a great show. And redundancy is a big part of that, which I learned from you guys last year.
Sure.
And maybe you can share in your own words what that means, like redundancy and setting up the rigs, because anybody can just use Ableton, right, to play back a couple clips, but you guys have a whole process that's really unique to what you do.
Right. So, not only from the years that Laura had working with Kanye and all the other shows, but since then we've even further developed a lot of workflow and session techniques, and then the way that those interact with rigs and hardware to come up with a series of designs, essentially, that we stand by, and that take what seems very simple, the playing back of music, right? Which turns out to be actually a totally complex process it's debatably the culmination of everything you learn in recording and basic audio engineering and session production. And it really culminates all those things together. And it's, I mean, the stakes are higher, obviously, in a live show scenario. So you have to be able to rely on kind of tried and true session and technical techniques. And a big aspect of that is what you mentioned, which is redundancy, which is basically two of everything, Noah's Ark style, where should one fail, I mean, maybe the Noah's Ark analogy breaks down pretty quick here, but you obviously need both in that scenario. Right. Where should one computer or session fail, we have an instantaneous and imperceptible switch over to the second system, the backup system. That's a big part of what is going on behind the scenes for all these big shows, so that you're not just flying depending on one laptop's ability to perform perfectly every night. There's actually a backup system there. So
yeah,
well, there's some secrets behind that.
The secret sauce.
We know.
Yeah. No, and I learned a lot from MasterTrack with a lot of that workflow. It's really cool. So I guess one thing that's interesting is being able to work with the artists themselves and kind of create the ideal show. And I imagine, that carries a lot of challenges with it as far as coming to an artist, because as part of the MasterTrack with the training that you guys did with our class of about 15 people, I think we had, was actually putting somebody who wanted to be a playback engineer working with these artists into stressful situations. So like we had like the hot seat where we would go up and just kind of sit down and work with an artist who was, it was all just like acting for the time, but like firing off all these ideas at us and be like, hey, I want to like loop the chorus, or can we do this? And so it's like a matter of being able to work really fast in real time and like high intensity stress jobs, and being able to work with an artist and be a good hang all at the same time. It's a lot more than just like building a rig and being like, here you go, so
totally.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you're in that, we called it the hot seat, when we bring someone in who we see as potentially being a good fit for this role. We would put them in the hot seat and see how they do, because like you say, it is more than just basically knowing how the thing works and being able to set it up. It's working with sometimes, very particular artists or their MDs, their music directors that are creative directing the project, right? Or basically breathing down your neck, expecting you to, not only do what they're asking you to do, but do the next thing they're thinking about asking you to do, or be ready to do it before the artist comes in, or before it's time to run the song next. You're pretty much in that producer position, but it's in the live context. And then in live context, there's a pressure to do things timely and quickly and have them sound right. And and then be cool and be fun to talk to at the water cooler after that,
Sure. Yeah, totally. You don't want to be fangirl.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that.
All the time.
I just want to add to that. The communication is the most important thing. As AJ was saying, an artist or a musical director will come up to you, say, hey, we want to change all these things, and it's 100% locked. Then the artist will come in and say, what is this? Like, this is different from what it was yesterday, and this isn't what I was envisioning. And then you have to like revert back to an old session, or then you realize, oh shoot, I didn't actually future-proof myself. So I got to like re-edit it together.
Yeah.
There's all different kinds of scenarios, not to mention the lighting in the video is all tied to our sessions as well.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot to consider, because once you start making edits, then it's going to affect lighting and video, and then you have to communicate that change to them and allow them the time to reprogram what they've done. Yeah. So it's a lot of communication, and some people, it breaks down a lot, especially in touring.
As Laura was saying, like if an edit is made and video doesn't know about it, it's going to ruin everything. And if the artist is like in the room and the artist is rehearsing and they're confused after that edit goes wrong, everything's going to come back to you. So you're both the start and the end of the flow of communication.
Yeah, no pressure.
That scenario actually came up recently. So basically we were doing rehearsals for a big show, and it was day beforehand, where the musical director was getting an idea in the moment about how we could extend the intro to the show. Right now, meanwhile, lighting and video have been programming according to the timing of the intro to the show for weeks at this point.
Yeah.
And it was very much that scenario where we had to basically interpret what was being suggested, determine if it's doable, and then make the edit, make sure it sounds the way they want to hear it, or that sounds the way that it should, and then that doesn't go and screw everyone down the chain of command from there.
Right.
Which it very much could have, but of course, when you're less than 24 hours away from a show with 20,000 people, you have to know that every little move you make is going to be correct for the audience. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of challenges. Do you have any other stories as far as maybe Greg, like that you've experienced challenges on the road or building out a set, working with an artist?
We lost Greg.
Oh, he froze.
I feel like I want to screenshot that and like tell him to use that profile picture. That's a good Facebook profile photo right there, Greg.
When he jumps back on, I mean, I will say, Greg was an intern February of 2018. Came in as an intern. He basically right before MasterTrack, and the first MasterTrack. Okay. Yeah, in fact, when AJ came in, that was one of the main things that we were going to work on. I said, okay, I'm going to build this program. I need help with it. Yeah. So Greg came in for the first iteration of MasterTrack, and he just had his first thrown to the wolves experience this summer, which he crushed, where
nice.
We had someone that wasn't, working out on Logic, just wasn't the right fit energetically. And Greg just stepped up.
Yeah.
Yeah, Logic artist. Yeah. Greg jumped in and ended up doing what was it, 4 or 5 months of shows, of festival shows. Not small shows. Huge shows.
Right.
Yeah. So Greg, do you want to speak about your experience?
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like that would be a really fun tour.
It was a good time. It was very, I don't know, like to kind of just go from 0 to 100 in that way is a bit of a shock, but you just have to roll with it. And I don't want to be cliche, but going with the flow, there's a certain essence to that. I'm very lucky and thankful to have gotten so much just preparation, like, and through MasterTrack, through just learning from Laura, learning from AJ, getting the mentorship I needed, but also just like the support. One thing about EC is like we are a support team. We're a family, we're a network, and we have each other's backs, and that's how we're able to do these things and sustain them, because one engineer is a phone call away, one engineer is a text away. So if you have an issue on the road, or if you're like feeling some type of way about a certain kind of social situation, because those do arise on the road as well. It's not all just tech, as we were saying earlier. someone's there to chat with. And as it pertains to this tour this summer, I definitely was inheriting a session that had been touched by many different people. It was like a very solid session, but it was messy, and just having to wrap my head around that while also putting out a fire that was pretty high stress, and subsequently, moving on to actually go and do festivals where I'd never even really done playback for like a shed or for like, like a club. It was do or die. Basically, Laura called me the morning of one Monday morning at like 9:30 in the morning, and she was like, "So, what are you doing today?" And I was like, "Well, I was probably going to go to the studio because we have some work to do." And she's like, "Well, actually, Forrest and I need you to go to center staging to help out this engineer who's having some issues. We're not really sure what's going on, but we know that there's an issue. We need you to go handle it." And that was that. And if you get the call, you got to step up and just believe that whatever's going to happen is going to work out. And somehow it did. And fast forward 2 days later, they're like, "Oh, so by the way, there's a festival in Maryland this weekend that Logic's doing. You're going." And I was like, "Okay, great, let's do it."
Cool.
And I think Greg tried to say something about like, "Oh, I gotta go visit my parents," or something. I was like, "Greg, with all due respect, love your parents. You're not going to visit your parents right now. Tell them I'm sorry."
That's funny. You're like, "Listen, your parents are gonna still be there when you get back,
and they will be excited to hear that I'm, working." And I mean, it was great, and it was nerve-wracking, and it taught me a lot just about how to work kind of with the EC internal team, but also like the bridge that you have to walk across to work with like an artist's team. So much of this job is, I don't want to say it's not babysitting per se, but it's like you're managing a lot of different egos at once because you're like the epicenter of the show. So you have to just make sure that everyone's feeling good. And you have to make sure that you're focused on what you need to do as well, right? Like you don't want to get pulled too far into one direction, or you don't want to get like pulled out of your element because people are counting on you. One thing a production manager told me was I was like asking him, "Hey, how can I be more involved? Like, do you need me to do this? Need me to do that?" And he just put his head on my shoulder and he was like, "Greg, I just need you to focus." And there's a lot to that, when it's time for you to act and to do your thing, you have to come as correct as possible. Otherwise they'll find someone else.
Yeah. I mean, there was two things that Laura, you said a lot at MasterTrack last summer, and one was stay in your lane. And I think that kind of goes a lot to what you just said, Greg, as far as like, you have the MD, you've got like production director, you've got all these different people trying to pull off this big show, and it's like, focus on what you need to do to keep that show great. That sounds like kind of what you were just talking about.
Yeah, play your part. It's a team game,
and it's an interesting part to play.
It's not just one person. I think one of the biggest misconceptions that maybe a fan can make is that an artist is doing all this by herself or by himself, and it's like, no, there's a team not only of like in charge of like an artist's brand or in charge of like the artist's sort of day-to-day affairs. That's one team. Then you have the live team who is in charge of everything sonically for the tour, for the production. And that's like 20 to 30 people, maybe even more, like big tours, it's like 100 people. So it's, you got to know who everyone is. You have to know who you are, and you have to know how to play your part to make sure that this, colossus of everyone working together can like walk and live and breathe as its own kind of entity.
Yeah, totally. You're going to say something, AJ, I think.
Oh yeah. I was you had me thinking because, Greg, you talked about being the epicenter of all these different things. And in a kind of organizational sense, when you look at the way tours are run, that's pretty literal because EC is all our connections and relationships are typically coming from artists themselves, or the MD, or possibly the production manager that has a history with that specific artist. In other words, we are hired by the team that wants us there for the musical aspects we bring. We're not there hired by the same people that hire the audio crew, or we're not exactly part of the band, but we're also not exactly part of the production. We really exist between production, band, crew, in a way that connects them all, but kind of leaves you as an intermediary between them all, which is ideal in I think for a lot of us on EC. That's ideal because you're not slotted in with the crew to where your responsibilities are largely physical and technical. You really are in on the music, and you debatably should know the music better than anyone else. You're not part of the band to where, sometimes you are, depending on the gig.
Right.
You could be operating playback from stage, but
yeah,
you have responsibilities outside of that, and you're not just kind of lumped into maybe just the guitar player role or the keys player role. Like you are kind of at the core of the musical production in that sense too. And then of course you're not part of the production. You're not there managing anyone's schedule or doing too much administrative work. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting kind of Venn diagram to look at, because playback ends up in the center.
Yeah.
And what's more, Greg, you talked about going from 0 to 100, or basically that you're learning, that we were all learning from the rest of the EC team and network over these years, and then being thrown in the fire bit by bit. And then one day you get a call, and that's the first big gig. And realizing, and maybe you had this realization too, that actually it's something you've been training for your whole life. Like that was how I felt, realizing like, hey, starting to play piano when I was 5, like training my ear back then, like that helps me pick out keys very quickly and sing back melodies or reference arrangement and chordal structure in a way that totally comes into play. Like the band side that I peer into when in the playback position recognizes that. But then the audio crew side recognizes, hey, I can also tell you, what a balanced cable is or whatever. And that the education on that began, when I started messing around in studios when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
It all comes into play. But what's funny is that there's not really any educational institutions that know how playback is working in the now in 2020 and we're in a new decade.
Yeah, totally.
It's very much on the cutting edge. So you're not like, we didn't really learn this at Berklee. You know what I mean? Although there were hints.
Yeah.
So that's what makes it interesting, is it all culminates.
Right. Yeah. And like you were saying, there's a lot of different hats you can wear as a playback engineer, and it's been around for a while. Like playback isn't anything new, but as far as the way it's evolved and your process as electronic creatives, the way you're doing things with redundancy and the rigs you've built and everything you guys have done kind of separates you and the crew from maybe somebody else who's just flying solo and figuring it out for themselves, and they just happen to get picked up on a one-time thing. And I actually started, my very first playback gig was about 4 years ago, and it was with a pretty large artist, and they handed me their rig, and I just went down pretty blind. I didn't get a whole lot of information before I went to Nashville. Showed up the day of rehearsal, and like all their stems were like unbalanced, and there was just a giant like spaghetti monster coming out of the back of the rig, and everything was tangled. And I'm just sitting there. And the one thing that I think is really cool about what you're doing here at Electronic Creatives as a team is having that support, is where if there was something that was to go down or there's a struggle, you have a whole crew of people that your playback, like Greg or AJ, you guys can people can call you and get a hold of you and be like, hey, what's going on here? Like, I need help with this rig or something bad happens. You guys have a nice support network for anybody wanting to do playback that works under your team and that umbrella. So yeah, no, totally. That's cool. I mean, you guys have had some really awesome artists that you've worked with. Let's talk a little bit kind of about MasterTrack, because I feel like that changed a lot of workflow for me as far as working with other bands since last summer, and also since for my own live band, my band Philia has been playing out more. And I built a lot of my rig and workflow in Ableton Live using like Setlist Pro and a couple of other tools that you guys are using. I'd love to maybe kind of nerd out a little bit and wrap things up talking more about the MasterTrack. So Laura, like maybe you can, this is kind of your baby, like in the MasterTrack world, like what does that look like for somebody? Like as far as what is MasterTrack really?
Well, MasterTrack was really just born out of me deciding to get a little bit smarter about how I was training people, because I was training people one-on-one for years. And then I was like, wow, well, if I actually organized an event, I could train a bunch of people at the same time. And the origin of EC was actually master classes way back in the day, like over 10 years ago. And so I basically just kind of revamped the master classes that we've done and made it specifically for Playback Engineering. Mm-hmm. So the idea is that we vet people, they apply for the MasterTrack program, and they do a skills test with Greg. And after that skills test, if we think they're a good fit for MasterTrack, then we invite them to come to MasterTrack. Mm-hmm. And so as you remember from last year,
you had to apply.
Yeah, definitely apply. So
Greg drilled me with questions. It was good. I passed. Thanks, Greg.
You did great.
Thanks,
you did great.
So really the idea is to provide people with an immersive experience, like Greg was saying earlier about just getting thrown into the fire, and we were talking about the hot seats that we do. We really want to simulate an experience like being on tour, and of course nothing is ever going to be exactly like that, but we want to prepare people as much as possible. So it's going over all the gear that's needed, redundancy, all that stuff that you mentioned, building rigs, going over Ableton Live sessions. I go through tons of sessions that I've worked on with a lot of the top artists in the world, just get a peek into those sessions, go over editing techniques, go over how EC does things, our standard ways to create a session, the way that we work, our workflow, file structure, all that kind of stuff, which seems really small and insignificant, but we've worked on it quite a bit at Electronic Creatives to make our process just more robust. To working with artists themselves, we bring in musical directors and artists and bands, and have the master trackians, as we call them, work with them right in the moment and do the hot seat stuff with them. So it's really just like as much as possible crammed into 5 days as we can. Mm-hmm. And then on the 6th day, we have a party, and we invite all of our industry friends to the party, and we have a lot of good food and drinks, and we DJ, Greg DJs.
Oh yeah, and we had a lot of people jumping on the decks that night.
yeah. So
collaborative space.
It was fun.
Mm-hmm. So that's basically what MasterTrack is, and there's so many different playback gigs out there. I mean, obviously we work with pop and hip hop quite a bit, but we also do theater, immersive theater productions like the Cages show. Multimedia productions. There's all different kinds. We work with independent artists on the come up. So there's all different types of shows. There's a lot of like worship shows that we actually don't work with that much, but there's the worship community. There's tons of opportunities for playback out there, and more and more these organizations are leaning on playback because they don't have as many band members. It helps save on costs, and so it's not as good for band members, but good for us.
yeah.
So totally. So really, it's just our intention to get people up to speed and to provide a network and community for people, and to interface with electronic creatives and learn about what we do.
Yeah. I can speak from personal experience. Laura's not paying me to say this, but it was a really awesome, life-changing experience in some ways. I'm still in touch and in contact with a lot of the guys that I stayed with for that week in the Airbnb, which is one of the nicer Airbnbs I stayed in. And the last day at the party, it was really cool. Everybody like had like a giant table full of MIDI controllers, and we're all just like nerding out super hard. And it's cool to be in a group for a week in LA, which is one of my favorite cities. But being with a bunch of people who are like at the same level of nerdiness that you are, where it's like you can all kind of share something new, and like everybody's got more of an advanced skill set and is already doing something within music, you know, whether it's them as an artist or already working in the industry full time doing something. It was just cool. It was almost kind of like a little brotherhood that formed at that Airbnb and everybody in the class, and it was a good time for sure. So I would definitely recommend it. And once again, Laura's not paying me to say this. This is good.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. One thing I did want to mention is it definitely was a brotherhood because it was all guys there.
Yeah. Right.
But we are actively trying to get more women involved in MasterTrack and Playback Engineering in general. And this year we are hosting a scholarship for a woman, a full ride to MasterTrack.
Really? Okay.
So there's information about that on our website. I think the deadline is end of March to apply. So any women identifying that are listening to this podcast, please go check that out.
Hey, that's a great opportunity.
Yeah.
Do that. Mm-hmm. Yes, for sure. That's cool. That's really cool. Well, not only just as far as the family and the community and bonding and networking aspect, but I know that you've picked up several people from the past. You know, for you, this is also an opportunity to be like, hey, this person's super advanced and would work well with our team. And you picked them up and kind of gave them opportunities as well. So there are opportunities, I guess, for maybe somebody to work with an artist after MasterTrack. So I think that's cool that you're doing that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's just so many amazing, talented people, and the ones that have those skills that we mentioned earlier, that the good cross-section of all those skills, we're definitely looking to work with amazing people that fit our culture and our community, because we have just built an amazing team. We work together really well. Yeah, for sure. And you don't necessarily have to live in LA where you're based to be doing that kind of stuff, right? No. We've got people from different states and cities. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is beneficial to live in LA just because we get together more regularly and there's more training. It's easier to train, but
sure,
can be based anywhere. Yeah.
I'm looking outside at snow right now, thinking about LA, just missing it. I have a bunch of really confused geese in my lake right now. They all just flew back because it got really warm and then it snowed. And they all looked really distraught. It's like, I can't wait to be in LA in 3 weeks, actually. So that'll be nice. But yeah, I mean, totally. When is the next MasterTrack? That's coming up in June? Yeah,
the week of June 15th. It's the 15th through the 20th.
And when do you need to apply?
When do your applications close now? I'm not sure when they close, Greg. Do you know?
They're, given that we've adjusted, they're open for a while.
Yeah, I would say at least through April.
Yeah,
probably mid.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yes.
We actually just actually changed the date because we had so many students that wanted to come to MasterTrack, and it was like right smack dab in the middle of their year.
Yeah.
And last year we actually did MasterTrack unknowingly on a break from school, so we did have some students there. But this year that date falls in the middle of my American Idol schedule, so we could do it.
Yeah.
So anyway, we changed the date to accommodate the students.
Sure.
And we moved it to June. It's going to be the summer.
Yeah. Good times. Awesome. I love it.
Yep.
Everybody go do that or apply if you're more advanced with Ableton Live. It's a good opportunity.
Yeah. But the sooner you apply, the better, because we have an early bird discount. So
we do, and applications are competitive. Just because you apply is no indicator that you will be attending.
Yeah, Greg's gonna drill.
Yeah, because we actually already have like something like 60 people that have applied. So
that's awesome.
We've got a lot of people to talk to. Yeah,
cool. Yeah,
a lot of high caliber applicants.
There you go. Put them in the hot seat. Yeah. Yeah, like I said, I met a lot of people through MasterTrack. It was a really cool opportunity. Peter Dyer was actually one of the people drilling us in the hot seat, and he was on the podcast a couple episodes ago.
Oh,
So
cool.
Yeah.
a good
He was
networking
awesome.
opportunity, good opportunity to learn some new things, more than just Ableton Live. The hardware side was really interesting for me, marrying Ableton's workflows with the hardware and redundancy. That was something that I wasn't super familiar with. Being a software nerd for so long, diving deeper in the hardware side, it's been good. Yeah, and then you also, real quick, I know that time's running short, but I know that you also are still doing Transmute, right?
Yeah, so we'll be doing Transmute in March and April.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of this year. This is going to be our third Transmute. It's an online program for independent artists to learn how to level up their live performances using Ableton and technology and controllers and all that stuff. So it's like a one-stop shop program to learn how to do everything from creating your tech writer to building out your set. There's a lot of crossover between Playback and MasterTrack and Transmute, but the focus for Transmute is you doing it yourself on stage, controlling all of the things
for yourself.
And we've got online, for yourself as an artist, and we've got online performances, and we have like an after the fact, after the program's done, a performance opportunity in Los Angeles where
I saw that not too long ago. That looked cool.
Yeah, it was cool. So we're actually getting ready to announce Transmute next week again. So those of you from around the world that are live performers and want to learn how to level up your live skills, definitely check that out.
For sure. Yeah, and everybody listening right now that wants to get more involved, there's going to be links in the show notes for this episode. So wherever you are streaming in the world, Spotify or wherever iTunes, just scroll down to the show notes and we'll have links to MasterTrack, Transmute, and all the other happenings with EC. Yeah, was there anything else you guys wanted to share? I know that time is getting short, but I'm super grateful and thankful to have you guys on the podcast today. Encourage all the listeners to go check out the upcoming MasterTrack and what you guys are doing. You've worked with some incredible artists, and everybody on the team just seems really awesome, and like you guys are doing great things. Just nice people. It's a cool community that you're building.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure. Well, if you guys don't have anything else you want to add, then have a fabulous Wednesday. I think it's a Wednesday. Yeah. Happy Hump Day, everyone.
Second week of 2020.
Thank you so much.
I know.
Yeah,
right?
2020 energy is in full effect.
It really is. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Let us know when you're in LA, man.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
Right. Peace.
See you.
Bye.
Later.
Bye.
This podcast is sponsored by liveproducersonline.com, a community of Ableton Live users connecting you to the pros to learn today's music production.